delay, I'm proud to bring you Mr. Lyndon LaRouche.
Well, there was some very interesting news that was given to me today, earlier, and that is that I never have seen in my life such a parade of implicit indictments of a president of the United States as was reported to me today. I'm not going to comment on the details of this report, but I simply say that it comes as a blessed sign from heaven or something of that like that, and we should be greeted as such. It's obvious that what is obvious, without going into the details, which are better stated by relevant legal authorities and judicial authorities than by me. But I can say that what I've heard today, and I do understand what I've heard, that this is probably the greatest indictment of an incumbent president of the United States that I've ever heard. If there's one that occurred less ominous than this one, I don't know what it was. And I think I know the history of the United States pretty well. But that comes not as a finality of anything, because this situation is subject to all kinds of reversals back and forth. But the fact that such a counter to the president's behavior has been stated publicly by a federal court is in itself a very important development, even without trying to interpret what has been said. But the implications are, as any plain language view would say, this man has been slapped down back and forward repeatedly through the whole reading of these charges. Now that does mean there's a qualitative shift in the political situation inside the United States, which the reading of these charges, conclusions I presume, have been delivered. I don't think any president could withstand what has been read against them with such precision in the history of the United States. Some people have maybe hated someone more than they hate this fellow, but they certainly have placed the charges, and I don't think that without the equivalent of some kind of coup d'etat in support of the president, that he can withstand this. If these charges are presented and concluded, and if the consequences follow, this man is probably on the way out of office, barely since the time he was reinstalled in it. So that's probably a double whammy in this case. But what this does show with conclusion, which I can speak to on that account, is that after these charges have been placed and reported by the federal court, that this president is in deep trouble. And that much is clear. Now what it means for the rest of us is that the situation was so bad in terms of the Congress that the Congress should have delivered precisely these kinds of charges beforehand. And undoubtedly there were people inside the Congress, the Senate and House, particularly the Senate, who would have proceeded on these charges if encouraged to do so. And I think that has to be considered a factor, that all the ideas that somehow Obama has come off clean on the basis of his reinstallation as president, that is in doubt now. I don't believe that any president, unless he has the powers to conduct a coup d'etat, may remain in office under the continuation of the list of charges which have been presented as conclusions by the federal court. So this is a new situation, and it means also a new situation for us in terms of things like troubles as much as anything we might find pleasant in this whole proceeding. The United States is in deep trouble. Our economy is in the process of disintegrating. We are about the point that an actual breakdown of the Congress could occur, of the end of the courts. And therefore, Bernanke, what's going to happen to Bernanke? The courts are against him. And probably that will be effective. It's not guaranteed, but it probably will be effective. And the citizens of the United States are going to have to wake up. And that's quite possible that they will. Because the usual way that people talk about presidential institutions, Congress and so forth, is nonsense. There actually has been usually not more than 5% of the voting population which has had the guts to do anything serious, actually do it. Many members of the Congress, for example, will gripe privately behind the scenes, but they won't do anything. And generally it's between 5 and 10% of the total membership of the Congress, which is likely to take on an issue such as this one. Perhaps the implication is, and I say perhaps, is that the presentation of these charges, these brought by the court, will give some courage to a lot of people who are otherwise scampers as cowardly heroes, shall we say, before. But the point is, on the other hand, you take the British monarchy and certain elements of the U.S. government and the population, and they are going to fight back. They're going to fight back hard. And they would even try coups d'etats and things like that, things of that nature. So we must be aware of the fact that there is, without doubt, apart from what the federal court has decided on the case of Obama, is that there is going to be a big kickback from forces in certain parts of Europe. The British monarchy in particular will be enraged by this. Other parts in France will be enraged. Some people in Germany will be enraged. You will have a certain factor of rage from the bad side in Italy. You will have also the anger in Spain and Portugal and other places. This means a sudden turn in the strategic situation and role of Russia in this period. All these things have been made open by this decision, the rendering of this decision by the federal court. And this is something new which did not exist for me 2 days ago, and it probably did not exist for a lot of other people. But it shows that in the system, the federal courts have acted, the federal court has acted in a way which portends the opportunity for getting out of the mess we've been digging into for so long. This is a new opportunity, and it's a time for the citizens of the United States to rally to the cause of our nation and prepare to support the actions of the federal court. And with that, I will leave it to you for a moment. The question then posed, well, what's wrong with the Congress? Well, we know what's wrong with the Congress. That more than half of them are cowards and opportunists. And therefore, the Congress was not able to do the job that had to be done. And under those conditions, it was up to the Supreme Court to see to it that the job was done, or the basis for having the job done was presented by a higher authority. And the particular list of things that I've heard all go to that point. So we're now presented, because higher authorities have realized, as I have, that this President Obama is a horror. He's a horror story. And the members of the Congress didn't have the collective guts to do anything about it. They've swallowed every indecency imposed upon them as a Congress, both in the Senate and in the House. Now, we know that, as I know, for example, you have between 5 and 15%, probably, approximately, of the members of the Congress have the guts to do anything. And therefore, the fact that the majority of members of the Congress are, by disposition, they tend to be opportunists. They see which way the wind blows, and they blow with it. So that therefore we had reached a situation in which the United States was going to be destroyed by this president. And he was even sworn in for a second term. But the fact remains, as with the Nixon case, that this is the extreme version of the old Nixon case, the old Nixon impeachment. But in this case, some authority other than the Congress was required to initiate the action which was required. And what I heard from the reading of the conditions of the charges, of the conclusions of the court, those conclusions were all in correspondence to the requirements. And I go into his first term, the president's first term in office, as also to the second. So there was every reason, that reason would demand, that this president should be impeached under those circumstances. The impeachment as a form has not been realized. The impeachment in terms of the indictment has. And that's the conclusion we have to draw. Now, that does not mean, now you're going to have the British Empire, as represented by the Queen, is going to be very angry about this. Because her whole role, her intention, it is on the edge. She cannot continue to do this if the United States continues to defy her. And the federal courts have implicitly defied her. Something deeper inside our system of government has acted to attempt to defend the United States against the travesties and crimes committed by this president. And therefore, I think that's the conclusion to be drawn. We now stand at a point, we're on the edge. The court has done pretty much what it should have done, and maybe a bit more in this case. That's good. That restores our confidence in the institutions of our government, contrary to this president. And the very minimum, the intention of the court has to be to recognize that what it has said is an honest and fair conclusion, set of conclusions. And these conclusions lead to but one further conclusion, that this guy must be impeached now. And that will probably occur. But there are other factors in the thing. There are always coup d'etat possibilities and things like that. So we don't know if this has any finality to it. But it comes so damn close to it that you almost have it say it is. Earlier today. But the key thing here is what has been said by the court as statements as a whole, not only this issue but other issues also, is a challenge to the presidency. Is a challenge to the occupation of the presidency by this president. Because he is the one who has taken the open responsibility for asserting this authority above the courts. And therefore, his very action is impeachable by nature. That much I will say is for what I am. I will let the court say what it wants to say about this, but that's what I say as a citizen, that this is the situation. Now, I also base my judgment on my knowledge of the crimes which have been committed by this president. He's a criminal, as far as I'm concerned. He's said things and done things which are criminal in their nature. He's also practiced intimidation, which is in his nature, but not in the nature of our government. There's nothing that he has done of this nature of it. For example, his violation of the war powers of the president, his violation of the restrictions on those war powers. First of all, he was not entitled to put troops into action in Libya. Not entitled to do that. It's a violation. And to go into armed conflict in Libya is a violation of the Constitution. He had no authorization to do that. He acted as a dictator. And that's a violation of our Constitution. Now, we act the fact that our Congress was cowardly and didn't do anything about it, and that one senator got by with supporting this crime of this president, doesn't alleviate the responsibility of anyone. The president should have been impeached for doing that. That was an impeachable offense. he should be impeached. Otherwise, the politer term, common to most people's knowledge, is he should have been thrown out of office promptly and immediately on the first time he did that. He should have been slapped in the face first, and if it continued, he should have been slapped out of office. It's the obvious fact. So the problem here is a fact of a cowardice shown by the Congress. The Congress permitted, or to one senator, permitted a violation of the Constitution in terms of the War Powers Act. And therefore that senator should have been impeached too, because he was complicit in a violation of the Constitution. He's not fit to be appointed to a more significant position. Maybe a rebuke or an official rebuke for what he had done would be sufficient. But he should not be promoted to an office with higher powers than he's enjoyed heretofore. This is the nature of the situation. And fortunately the courts existed. The federal court exists. And the federal court, with a series of actual indictments of this president, and there are a series of them, as you know, this man is no longer fit to be office. Nixon was a mild offender compared to this president, and on these charges alone to certify it. The problem is somebody's going to try to reverse this on some kind of appeal. On the case of the Hillary case, it's just the same problem. She's intimidated. She was abused, intimidated. That much I know. Her husband was thrown into a tizzy, a former president, thrown into a tizzy by what his wife had gone through. Made terrible decisions in terms of mistakes, which are terrible decisions on his part. But his wife was in danger from this president. And on the basis of one moment in her record as in the state, that was a case visibly of pure intimidation. And the President of the United States, I mean, she should have resigned. Actually, her only option was to resign the office, and then go back to the Senate, body of the Senate, and run a campaign against this president. That was her moral duty. It was a mistake for anyone to push her into taking that position under that president, because they shared, at least Bill shared the knowledge of what my view was, that she should not have capitulated to taking the position, considering the monstrous nature of the character of this president. She should have gone outside and said what she said and denounced him up and down, because she had been the only legitimate presidential candidate on the Democratic side. He was not. And she should have gone outside and moved back and rejected that in the first place, and stayed in the Senate. That's what she should have done. She had colleagues when she was a senator in the Senate who could fight this issue better than she could from inside the position she took of them. So that's the kind of situation we face. So that's the way we have to react to this. And we have to react to this. We all have, especially for someone in my position, I'm supposed to have guts to deal with things like this. And I always will, as long as I'm alive. I have a lot of experience with this sort of thing, with the history of our nation. And I would back up anyone, including her, Bill, on this issue. She should not have ever been appointed president. I do not consider him honestly elected as president on the basis of what I know. Foreign powers were using the proceeds of drug distributions, illicit drug distribution, in order to finance him to become the president of the United States. I would say this man himself is now purely a drug on the market, and he should be removed from office immediately. Because I know on personal knowledge where this present situation is going under this president. And anyone who's a true patriot, with the guts and knowledge to be a patriot, would support me in saying he must be thrown out of office now.